TV, a technological milestone in entertainment and information, the invention of which made the world a much more comfortable and better informed place. Television is truly a staple in humanity's ingenuity and technological advancement. And although television has impacted every culture significantly in some manner one way or another, arguably its influence had the greatest effect in Romania. Although television was available in Romania since 1956, the use of the technology was very limited. When the magic picture box arrived in the country, the nation was very much impoverished and under a totalitarian communist regime, which made the availability and use of it very limited. The technology picked up traction relatively in the late 60s and was limited to only 2 channels. Televiziune Română was one of the first channels and the main one used throughout the years. Up until the 80s, it broadcasted on average 14 hours a day and had a variety of programming. However, in the 80s, due to the country implementing insane policies to pay off its international debt, its broadcasting was limited to only 2 to 3 hours a day, starting from 7 p.m. and ending at 10. The program consisted of a news segment, which was followed by Ceausescu's report on the country's development, and if you were lucky, an Eastern Bloc produced movie. However, as you should know, in the 90s the communist regime collapsed, and with it the liberalization of the country ensued, as well as the liberalization of Romania's TV. In the years of 93 and 94, as the country underwent privatization programs, new TV channels started to appear. As the 90s progressed, small TV stations popped up, and TV became open to the public, and independent stations and programs became ever so prevalent. They produced their own original programming, news, imported pirated movies from the West, the Dallas American TV series, specialized TV stations for music such as Atomic TV, which broadcasted local and international music, and everything and anything in between, which made the 90s Romania TV, although primitive, very diverse. However, in the 2000s, one of Romania's most infamous and influential TV stations was born, Oglinda TV, meaning Mirror TV, or just OTV for short. The station was launched by a Romanian media veteran, Dan Diaconescu, who set up a studio in his apartment in the outskirts of Bucharest. Its main show was Dan Diaconescu Direct, which was a makeshift talk show with extremely amateur production value. We're talking about production levels that would make porn seem like Hollywood. The show became infamous as it would bring on guests that consisted of so-called spiritual mediums, small-time Manele singers, and 2-bit gangsters. Essentially guys he'd find around his block that would sell sniffing glue and low-quality amphetamines. Because the country was impoverished and the technology available in Romania was limited, a lot of the programming that ran on OTV from 2000 to 2004 became lost media. In 2002, OTV was shut down by the government due to its trashy program violating the broadcast law at the time. However, Diaconescu claimed that this was a politically motivated attack on him and his station, as the Prime Minister allegedly wanted to buy the station, but he refused his offer and was abusing his power by taking out revenge on him. After a 2-year imposed sabbatical in 2004, Diaconescu and OTV came back in full force. The studio was refurbished and the broadcast got a new and shiny overlay with not 1, not 2, but 3 news stickers, 1 at the top and 2 at the bottom, which will display breaking news to the public, which consisted of sensational titles to draw the attention of viewers. As in tradition at this point, the words incredible, sensational, and extraordinary were often used by Diaconescu himself, which accompanied any breaking news in the tickers, even if those news were that Diaconescu went to take a piss. The TV style of the show was also mocked continuously by other TV hosts, TV shows such as Animat Planet Show, and early Romanian internet memes. In its second rendition, OTV's main programming used to run the Conspiracy of the Day and Guests of the Day style shows. There was no real connection between the subject of each episode except for loose references to previous episodes. Think of it like it was pre-Netflix TV, essentially episodic with distinct episodes you can just start watching in the middle of the season without the need of context from the previous ones. Some of the most notable episodes were Diaconescu following ticket inspectors of Bucharest and filming their day-to-day routine and the fights they had with fare evaders. The investigation into the suicide of Romanian businessman Mihai Erbașu, where Diaconescu tried to recreate his death with a mannequin by throwing it off the balcony of a random villa. The whole point of the recreation being that there was no possible way for Erbașu to fall onto his head and kill himself, which then transitioned into a conspiracy theory that he was murdered. Then there was the episode where Diaconescu, alongside a special guest, tried to convince the audience that they could predict the upcoming lottery numbers. Of course, they weren't able to, and as a result, the TV show and station received mass lawsuits from the public. Another episode followed Diaconescu in the garden of some random villager, where they started digging up his yard only to find a dead body, which wasn't even shown on broadcast, but everyone claimed it was there. Then there was the episode where Diaconescu invited a clairvoyant onto the show who claimed he could speak with a deceased Romanian dictator, Nicolea Ceausescu. The audience was then allowed to ask him questions by sending an SMS to the show, which cost 1.2 euros per message. Then, an episode with Ildiko, the Hungarian clairvoyant, who can predict the future and read people's minds while blindfolded with towels. Then there was also the legendary debate between the two hated culture subgroups, the Emos and cocalars, Romania's white trash jocks, which ended in a fight in the studio between the two representatives. And last but not least, the episode where the show discussed the economic assassination of the Del cheese products, which were closed because they did not add harmful chemicals in them as ordered by the EU. They even went as far as to make a lament.
Unde ești tu, brânzădel? Cum mergeai cu un copănel? Roșii ceapă și măsline. Îmi e așa de dor de tine.
However, by the mid-2000s, things drastically changed, as in 2007, a lawyer going by the name of Elodia Ghinescu disappeared. And her disappearance became the biggest story every Romanian was talking about at the time. She was a former lawyer who disappeared on the 30th of August 2007 under mysterious circumstances. Her body was never found and she was declared dead in absentia. The main suspect was her husband, who was eventually jailed in 2013 and released in 2023 on parole. While the subject of her disappearance is worthy of its own true crime series, the CNA, aka the National Audiovisual Council of Romania, warned all TV stations to be really careful with how they approach the subject. However, OTV said F it and decided to do its own thing. They went with, like any self-respecting clickbait YouTuber, with hundreds of episodes with insane titles such as Elodia was spotted in a bus in Bratislava, we hired a hacker to break into her inbox and publish all her private conversations, and other such titles. Most notably that Elodia was hiding in the Carpathian Mountains with Osama bin Laden. Things went as far as Diaconescu bringing in a bassinet full of sulfuric acid and a cow's leg into the studio to show how Elodia was melted into pieces to dispose of the evidence. This whole telenovela about Elodia's disappearance lasted for 240 episodes. And while every other TV presenter was bashing the circus OTV was producing, they took notes. The consequences of OTV's programming and their Elodia series became far-reaching and became known as the process that is now called the OTVization of Romanian TV, as a vast number of stations in Romania copied OTV's methods of broadcast and trashy TV. As a result, the late 2000s broadcast was filled with flashy news stickers, sensationally clickbait titles, outright misinformation, and guests screaming at one another just to gain slightly bigger ratings. Even his most trashy programming with seemingly outrageous conspiratorial and outright fake segments were copied. For example, this can be demonstrated with another channel, Antena 1, made a segment covering a Moldovan poltergeist terrorizing a village, where they showcased a door and bucket moving on their own whilst interviewing the local villagers.
Camerele montate în casă au surprins momentul în care un papuc s-a izbit violent de ușă.
After the Elodia horse was beaten to complete and utter mush, Diaconescu went back to creating new programming which continually devolved into greater and greater absurdism. This era began with OTV staging an assault on Diaconescu by bringing in someone into the studio who had a big trash container, who then wrestled Diaconescu and threw him into it. Then they brought in the then president, Traian Băsescu, to schmooze Diaconescu, which ended with the president holding a lottery and the winner being awarded by him with a bottle of alcohol. Diaconescu even decided to get into politics by starting his own party, known as Partidul Poporului, the People's Party, that promised to give every child upon turning 18 $20,000 in cash from them. With his embarking into politics, he then renamed the channel Televiziunea Poporului, aka the People's Television, and had the staff refer to himself on broadcast as the future president of Romania. At this point of the video, I'd like to note that this wasn't some off-brand schizo channel. Rather, it was one of the most, if not the most viewed channel in Romania at the time, and OTV's shenanigans were broadcasted on national TV across the entire country. Millions of people turned in monthly to watch Diaconescu and his programming. In 2011, which is considered their peak, they had an average of 84,000 watchers per minute. An entire middle-sized town watching OTV per minute. However, things soon started to change. In 2012, mass protests erupted across the country as the government proclaimed they will privatize the Romanian medical system. This scandal was followed by protests over the impeachment of the president at the time, Băsescu. OTV, not being one to let an opportunity pass, seized the moment and started calling themselves the only free station and the emergency broadcast station. As you would expect, they started spreading disinformation about railways being cut and that the protesters were asking for Diaconescu to become president. Of course, these claims weren't even remotely true, and as such, the CNA fined them to high heavens. Due to all the violations and unpaid fines, their broadcasting license was revoked in 2013, even with trials, appeals, protests, and a general circus made subsequently over the decision by Diaconescu. He tried to circumvent this by establishing a company in the holy city of the Vatican and broadcasting from there. This remained an online-only TV stream, as no actual broadcasting company would dare touch OTV with a 10-foot pole. The only TV station that ran reruns of their programming was Romania TV, another shitpost of a station that today is in the business of spreading Russian disinformation. Soon after OTV was shut down, Diaconescu was convicted of attempted blackmail of a public official and was forced to spend a few years in prison. In a desperate cling to relevancy, he also tried to buy a bankrupt chemical plant and made it his mission to save the workers of the plant. However, he did not have the money to do so, even though he brought huge trash bags full of money to the auction for the plant. Ultimately, his efforts were for naught, and OTV never recovered. Diaconescu throughout the 2010s slowly but surely became irrelevant and only mentioned at parties and gatherings amongst friends in the context of, holy shit, remember when this was a thing on TV? But even though OTV has become a thing of Romania's zeitgeist, it is still something that left a huge impact on the nation's media and entertainment industry, with many stations and programs implementing Diaconescu's infamous tactics. Although OTV is no longer running, their shenanigans are still talked about to this day, and the few clips that exist on YouTube from their golden days are still a subject of mockery in Romanian meme culture. Doresc să spun, dragă Diaconescu, oriunde ai fi tu, glorie eternă a Partidului Poporului Dan Diaconescu. Doamne ajută! Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, give it a like and smash that subscribe button. And if you really did, become a member like these wonderful people. My name is Janos, and you've watched Living Ironically in Europe.
Hey, why are you leaving?